You as an artist individually can potentially have an impact on how this all unfolds, how this develops. You can have an impact on like this next chapter of the music industry if you want to get involved. You don't have to, but you can also just only focus on music and creativity and, hopefully have some great people around you to take care of the rest. That's great. I respect that mindset 1,000%. But I just know for me personally, I'm really excited about having some impact on the future of the industry.
Episode 36 of Invest in Music with Dot. Today we're here to talk about Portal, her new collective that she just released for Onchain Music, along with new management, life as a touring artist, and much, much more. As a reminder, you can collect this episode on investinmusic.xyz. I want to give a quick shout out to Jason Meinzer, Alex Mazmej, and LuckyBrick.eth, who are our top collectors from last week. Dot's an amazing artist. She had so many stories to tell. So without further ado, let's get into it. Episode 36 of Invest in Music with Dot. All right, we are back, fresh off a 14-hour flight from Istanbul. We got Dot in the building. Dot, how are you feeling today?
What up? I'm feeling great, very caffeinated. How are you feeling after that flight?
I feel like I'm in a bit of a fever dream, but I'm very thankful and excited to be having this conversation. I've been a fan of your music for a long time, seen you live a number of times now, so just really stoked for you to give us the real perspective as someone that's really making a name for themselves in electronic music, and excited to cover quite a bit today.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me on. I mean, I'm so inspired by all the work you're doing in Web3 and the music industry. And so, yeah, I'm stoked for this conversation. It should be good.
Likewise. Well, let's go back to the beginning here. So for those who don't know you, obviously you're a touring electronic artist, but for people who might not have heard of you before, why don't you give a quick backstory on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been producing music for well over 10 years now, which is crazy to say and to think about. But I actually got my start. I interned for a lot of record labels. I guess it was around 2011, 2012. And kind of got my start more in like the LA underground beat scene. So I did a lot of work with Alpha Pup Records, had my very, very first releases of like the first beats I ever even made actually came out on Alpha Pup, and spent almost every single Wednesday night at Low End Theory, which was the club that they also ran. It was like an amazing weekly nightclub every Wednesday night at the Airliner. So that was very much my roots. But one of the things that I noticed as I was coming up through the scene was just there wasn't a ton of women who were active in production or DJing. I've seen it get a little bit better over the last 10 years, but still not great. So we're working on fixing that. But because of that, I ended up actually starting my own sort of female-focused label called Unspeakable Records in 2014. So I did a lot of work with that over the years, connected with a lot of amazing women and female-identifying artists, and was also a part of a collective called Team Supreme, which was this collection of like 19 different producers from all over the place. We had like these monthly sort of beat ciphers or weekly beat ciphers where someone would choose a sample and a BPM, and everyone would have like 30 minutes or an hour to make a track using those confines. And just learned a ton from those guys who was involved. It was like Mr. Carmack, Jemba Jemba, Penthouse, Great Dane. So many of my good friends all just came from that era. And we supported one another for a while. And I don't know, fast forward to now, like I've been touring a bit over the last few years. It's been awesome. Putting out music on this amazing new label called To Future. Got to play Red Rocks for the first time last year, which was super exciting, and just some other like dream stages that I never thought would happen, EDC, all these things. And so, yeah, it's been 10 years of a lot of grinding, but super grateful for where it's gotten me so far and excited for this new chapter. Yeah.
I think there's something very powerful about that 10-year time window. I've noticed over a couple of these interviews, it feels like a lot of artists start really seeing momentum when it's closer to that 10-year period. And that's really important to highlight because I think a lot of artists, really struggle to make it that far, to have the dedication and commitment to make it 10 years into their music journey. And I know, just kind of extending on where you're at right now, you also recently just announced something called Portal, which I'm really excited for you to talk about. Why don't you tell people a little bit more about Portal and what you guys are hoping to accomplish there?
Yeah, so Portal is kind of the next chapter of Unspeakable Records. which was my former label. And I'm really, really excited about this because it's going to be like combining what I consider to be the best of Web3 and Web2, like release methods and ways of valuing music, but also using tools to build community on chain. So one of the things that, for example, I love the most about Team Supreme, and one of the things that kept me consistent even to be able to make music for 10 years was the community that I surrounded myself with. And if I didn't have those influences or that inspiration or motivation from my peers to keep going, there's no way I would have lasted this long, honestly. So that's something that I deeply, deeply value, and want to make sure is really like the core reason why we're doing Portal Music. We're doing this label / collective. It's to bring amazing producers together to support one another. It's really cool to do on-chain releases and use that maybe as a fundraising strategy. But beyond that, I really see so much value in Web3 as far as community building goes. And that's why it's such an exciting time right now to even be building when the market's down a little bit, because you really see like who is still showing up for the power of the technology versus trying to make a quick bag or whatever. So I'm really excited about it.
Totally. And you've been really forward about making sure collectors are really noticed for some of your live shows. I've been fortunate enough to come and see you perform at festivals because I'm a collector of yours. I know you've constantly done different things to reward your collectors. Talk to me a little bit more about how you view your collectors versus more of your traditional fans that you built up over the years.
Yeah, I see collectors as, well, first of all, I feel like everyone's maybe intentions with collecting are a little bit different. So I don't want to put the same expectations on everyone. Not everybody wants to be involved. Not everyone maybe even wants to come out to shows and festivals, if that's not what they're into. But I do want to make sure that collectors know that like they are seen and they are having a very, very direct impact on my career, on my ability to even get out and tour and perform. Like so much of the funding that I received last year in 2022 was just tour support and helped me to cover a lot of my travel costs. And so I really want to make sure collectors know that like I see them, they have this direct relationship with my career. And that in some ways, direct or indirect, always I think affects the music. That's a part of the reason too why I'm wanting to be so creative with building companies and building structures around Web3, because I recognize that economics, whether or not people like artists want to look at it, it does affect the music that you make in some way. How you structure your life, how you structure your business is going to have some impact on your creativity. And so I just want to have like, a full honest relationship with that and feel good about the energy that I pour into that. And it's just amazing to have this ability to be supported directly from collectors versus maybe another company or entity that you don't have as much of an alignment with on some other basic values. I don't know if that makes sense, if I'm being too vague, but yeah.
No, it does. And I think for people who are listening that maybe don't have the experience, without going into too much detail on numbers, talk about, you mentioned tour support being something that you funded with the proceeds from selling your music on chain. What does that look like? Like describe the life of a touring artist and some of the, costs and overhead associated with making that a reality.
It's pretty wild. I think, a lot of people might look at even what some top DJs are making. And really, unless you're in that super, super upper echelon, you're pretty lucky to break even because you just accrue so many costs. And even as you kind of climb up the scale as far as like what you're doing with your production or, touring with photographers or hiring photographers and videographers at the show, it's like things just add up so quickly. You have to give maybe 20% or 15% to your management, another 20 or 15% to your agent who's booking everything. Maybe you have someone doing your advances. Like I said, media, photography, videography, that all costs a lot. Anytime you want to have added effects on your sets. So like if you see a DJ that has crazy pyro and CO2 and all this stuff, all that costs a lot of money and it actually comes out of the artist's pocket. It's not always just built into the costs of the production for the stage. So the economics of it to like really make it work are tricky. Like you have to be very diligent and deliberate with your strategy. And the first few years, it costs money. Like that's the reality of it. So it's kind of a catch-22. Like you obviously need to get out there and get in front of audiences in order to share your music. I think just only having an online strategy is challenging. I definitely make the best connections with fans during in-person interactions and shows. And, on top of that, it's like my favorite thing in the world to do. So of course I'm going to like try to just scrimp and save and make it work so I can perform. But it's really, really tough. Yeah. I know any artist would say the same thing. Tough for bands, especially too. They incur even more costs just because you have greater personnel, gear, etc. So it's an interesting world out there.
Yeah, and I think especially for DJs, obviously I'm just speaking from what I've heard from other people, but it sounds like it's all just an investment to get into that upper echelon. Whether it is like your headline tour, if you are starting to play on these festival circuits, it's like you're basically just investing a lot of time, energy, and cost into hopefully getting into that upper echelon where then you can be making, a lot of serious money on a very consistent basis. But for those first, let's call it 5 years of touring, sometimes even longer, you're really just grinding city to city overnight, red eyes, 6 a.m. flights, whatever hotel you get put up in, just to have that 60 minutes to get on stage. And don't get me wrong, that's an extremely beautiful and special thing. And I don't think any artist would trade it for the world. But I think that's sometimes what fans don't see or understand, that there is like a lot of mental struggle that goes into that, a lot of financial pressure that goes into it. And it's not just sunshine and rainbows. You're up there making, 50 grand a night just because you're on stage at a major festival. Like that is a lot of very, very hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a grind, but we do it because we love it.
Yeah, 100%. And you said something else interesting there, which was, building your online community. I think one thing that also excites me about your story is you had an international study abroad period in your life. I know that you went to school just outside of Barcelona. Can you talk a little bit more about that chapter of your life?
Yeah, so I think this was around the end of 2017. I just kind of hit a wall with my career. I was really exhausted. I was burnt out. Just wasn't really sure what the next step was going to be. I was like spinning my wheels, making a lot of songs, making a lot of content, but like wasn't really seeing anything go anywhere. Wasn't seeing it translate to bigger numbers. Um, and because I've always spent a lot of my time teaching as well, just to make ends meet and pay the bills, I thought it would be a good idea to go back to school for my master's degree, and just be able to then bring even more value to the students that I teach. So I did Berkeley College of Music. They have a satellite campus in Spain, in Valencia. And I think another friend of mine was like applying for grad schools or something around the same time. And I just had this thought like, like what would that be like to go back to school and be a student again instead of the teacher, and just be open to learning and not have that pressure of like career and teaching and all the things. So I applied for the program. And I also just really wanted a student visa, honestly, to get out of the United States for a little bit and have the opportunity to live in a different country if I could. So I went and did that. And then I was still working remotely during this program. It was a 1-year master's program in production and technology. And I just found that I was still able to sustain myself pretty well working remotely, teaching remotely, teaching online programs, and producing for other artists remotely, and like doing some more mixing and mastering projects for them. So that was all happening from the years 2018 to 2019. And that just kind of set me up to then keep experimenting, I guess, with that fully online model when I got back to the States. Just in time to kind of set up a base for when the pandemic hit. Got kind of lucky with that. But yeah, it really opened my eyes to just some non-traditional ways of, even as an artist, like structuring a teaching career. Like it's wonderful to go and teach at other schools and institutions, but there's so much that you can offer just directly to people on your own if you put in a little bit of time and energy to, set up a website and reach people online. So that was like a really, really awesome phase of my life for sure. And just incredible to live in Spain. I have so much love and passion for the people and culture. So it was really, really cool.
What are some things that you took away from that program, whether it was the program directly or from living abroad? Like, how did you come back to the States and allow that to influence the next chapter of your career?
I think, honestly, I really think I learned more from the living abroad aspect of it than the program itself. That's certainly not a knock to Berkeley. They're an exceptional school. Um, but there was something about just completely getting out of my comfort zone and moving to a country where I didn't speak the language. Like in school, I learned French. Um, and so there's similarities with Spanish, but I didn't know anyone. I didn't know the language. I was completely, um, so many miles away from so many of my comforts, from my friends, from my peers, like fellow producers. It was an entirely new group of people. It was an intimidating environment because I'm like, oh my gosh, Berklee College of Music. It's like such a legendary school. And now there's all these new people that I'm going to be like measuring myself up against. That's just what, we do sometimes as artists. We're constantly comparing. It's hard to turn that off. So really, I think I gained the most from getting myself completely outside of my comfort zone that year and just trying something new in a new country and seeing if I could even survive, like, working almost full time and then going to school in this condensed program where it's like a 1-year master's program. Like, it was a lot, but I just really appreciated that pressure so much. And that year actually is when I started getting more into distance running and endurance sports too, and exploring kind of more athletics and figuring out like how training also influenced like my creativity and writing. And yeah, it was a really awesome year for sure.
Yeah, it sounds super formative. And I would say that, life as an artist is often very untraditional. And it feels like in a lot of ways, just being able to put yourself out there in a completely new environment and just figure out how to survive, like it feels directly correlated to coming back to the States, going through COVID, as you mentioned, having your whole online foundation. I mean, you said it was luck, but it seems like in a lot of ways that discipline that you develop by going overseas and like studying for this master's degree, it probably gave you a lot of, just stability when it came to figuring out how to exist in a very unfamiliar climate.
Definitely. I mean, that's exactly it. You hit the nail on the head. It's when you practice these things, like it just, that confidence compounds, and then when you're met with more situations where things are uncomfortable or you're putting yourself out there in a big way and it's a little scary, having that past experience to kind of lean back on and trust is everything. And yeah, it's something that I definitely still continue to like try to talk about and teach with the artists that I work with now. I even ask people to do all sorts of weird creative cross training exercises, I call them, where like I'll have an artist like go into a Starbucks or something and just ask for a discount. And like, that the response is going to be no, but it's good to practice like getting rejected
Mm.
and like go through that and feel that. And then when you go to release music or something or put something on the internet, it could be as small as an Instagram post, maybe that going through that gives you a little bit more freedom to express yourself more fully and not care as much about getting rejected or care as much about, what others are going to say or comment. So yeah, I'm all about that.
Yeah, I was having this conversation yesterday where just posting on the internet is actually a very scary and vulnerable thing to do. And I think especially as an artist, you have this expectation that you have this very loud presence online, especially now in today's day and age, you need to be constantly in front of people's faces, making reels all the time, making TikToks, etc. How did you learn to develop that process for yourself? Because I know that I see you being very active on social media. Like, how did you develop that kind of skill set for yourself?
Yeah, it's I will say it doesn't really come naturally to me. If left to my own devices, I would just happily be a little hermit out here in my studio and not quite give as much face time as I do. Um, but I also really just love sharing music. I love teaching. So I try to think of in some ways like social media being like a teaching tool where I can share either life lessons that I'm working with or production techniques and really reframe it as like this is about my audience. It's not about me. Like the sharing, the act of sharing is about the other person. It's not about me. So I'm trying like really trying to take myself out of it as much as possible. But yeah, part of it's like definitely just, from doing research and studies on, okay, like what's trending right now, like what's going to work on social media, like what are some strategies, like very basic strategies that are working for creators, and how can I create a structure to then just implement that into my life. So I'm doing like, a minimum of 3 reels per week, and like, use this set of hashtags. And if that helps get my music out there, then that's great. And I'm going to try to systemize the work as much as possible so that it just doesn't take too much away from the things that I care more about doing. But any job, there's going to be something about it that you don't like doing. So I try to just be grateful for the tools that we have to share music and reframe it in gratitude and just get stuff out there. Yeah. Wish I had a better answer for that, but it's something that I still am working on and struggle with a bit.
Yeah, I don't think anyone has the perfect answer. What I have noticed though is it
No.
really just is one video that can change everything on social media, and it really is
Right.
just about taking 1,000 shots on goal, posting those videos 3, 5, 7 times a week, knowing that you're not going to get crazy results out of them. But then when one of those hits, it starts to just go crazy. Your
Yeah.
followers start going up, or your music starts streaming better. So I don't know. I definitely feel like for a while there was kind of this like anti short form video approach that I noticed within music, where everyone felt that it was like so negative and that they hated it and they didn't want to do it. And I think that people still feel that. But I think what people have started to realize is that there is such a positive behavior that can emerge from finding your voice online and realizing that this can be a tool and it doesn't have to be a burden all the time. And it feels like in a lot of way that we mentioned discipline and consistency with you making the beat ciphers, it almost feels like short form video content is now like the newest form of discipline that artists are having to learn to be relevant in the world today.
Yeah. And I think the potential gift in that is like if you can make that content creation just be something that's also going to enhance your craftsmanship in some way. Maybe you're sharing like snippets of music that you're working on, and you're breaking down the technique a little bit for other people. Like, yes, that's wonderful because it serves others who want to either know more about your process or learn more for themselves. But even just the act of explaining your process and sharing that with someone teaches you a lot, because you have to then be more mindful about exactly what it is that you're doing. So just like looking for little ways like that where the act of like creating this content is going to be beneficial for you in all sorts of other ways besides just for the sake of checking that box to be active on social media, is massive. It's huge. So yeah,
I don't think
hope to
it's
see
new
you
too,
doing
but
it.
I've noticed that it's blending into the live performance world so much too. I noticed that now a lot of tour managers are basically doubling as content managers, where they're capturing all
Yeah.
of these artist sets, posting those online and whatnot. And again, it's not a new behavior at all, but I have noticed that this sort of task of social media content creation is much more like relevant now in the live touring experience, where someone who traditionally would just be a tour manager is now kind of learning how to set up a GoPro every set in front of the artist, or being able to capture those 5-10 second clips in a set that everyone knows is going to have a good reaction. And I don't know, I'm just coming to appreciate the art of it, because I think, just to highlight again, I think there's a general notion that people don't like having to post so much content all the time. But I think that there's the harsh reality that you do need to do it to be consistent and to stay in front of people. And so now I feel like a lot of the artists that I see doing really well in the electronic world specifically, they're fully leaning into that. They're posting videos from every set that they play. They're posting tons of backstage content. They're touring videos. Like, they're just bringing you into their life. And I think that's kind of one of the bigger things I've seen about this new wave of electronic music, is that previously this whole like mystery era where you didn't really know the artist, you didn't know anything about them. They kind of had, whether it be a mask or like something in front of their stage, their
Yeah.
posts were all super cryptic. That's kind of going away. And what we're finding now, at least from my perspective, is that the artists that are succeeding are the ones who are really bringing you into their world and making you feel like you understand their personality and who they are, because it gives you something much more easy to relate to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that people are opening more windows to their lives. It's like it's giving fans kind of more access points. It's definitely not, we're no longer in that area. We're no longer in that era of hyper mystique, all these different secret names, secret side projects. I mean, I love a little bit of that. That's super fun, but I don't think that's not going to like bring fans into an artist's like career that's going to sustain them for the next 20 years or something. Like you really need to have that deeper level of understanding of like what their values are, of what motivates them, like why they do what they do, and like see more of their lives to like really want to connect on that level. So yeah, it's really interesting to see that transform. I wonder if it's ever going to like flip back again, where the next wave of artists goes back to being super mysterious and there's none of their personal life in the project. It's all just the art and that's all you see. I'm curious to see if that wave shifts again, but yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I think it probably will. I think it happens in cycles. If I had to take a guess of what that might look like, I'm obviously very passionate about virtual artists, the emergence of AI, and how that's being used
Yeah.
in music and whatnot. And I think that there's going to be some element of like a really well-known producer and artist creating an alias for themselves that's like heavily inspired by virtual artistry or by AI. And I think that
Yeah.
that like quote unquote secret side project is probably going to be less of like 1,000 follower SoundCloud account. And it's probably going to be more of like this super virtual entity that's posting a lot of content online, but you don't actually know who's behind the entity. You just know about the virtual entity itself.
Yeah. But I think like a lot of whatever ends up driving that is going to be the story and the narrative that they, put behind it. Yeah, I'm really excited to see this whole like new emergence, especially with AI. It's so exciting right now. So
Yeah, and I want to go into that a little bit. But before we do, I know that a big influence of Portal was obviously you were really into DJ culture. You're an amazing DJ. I always get so many great tracks just from hearing you play. Like, talk to me more about how DJ culture and sort of remixing and all these amazing things fit into Portal.
yeah, so I just love DJing so much. It's funny because I started out as a producer. I never would have really gotten into DJing had I not just needed a way to share the music that I was producing. And I've like gone through so many iterations of like this dot project where I've played with bands or created these really intricate Ableton sets and would do these live performances and stuff. But honestly, the most fun that I've had performing my original music, like honestly, has been through DJing. And what's like the most special thing about DJ culture for me is like you're always a part of this larger conversation or this larger narrative, like through sampling, through remixing, through referencing different things. It's like your artistry is how you're contributing to this conversation and like being a part of culture. It's not just about like, how completely original can I be and like reinvent the wheel and like invent a new genre. I just love that DJ culture is like always set in a place and time and it's commenting on whatever the conversation is that's happening at large. And I like for me, especially for anyone who's got like a solo project or they're just, like one producer working on music, even if you're producing with other artists, like a lot of that life is very isolating in some ways, if you're spending so much time at the computer, in the studio, whatever. So it's like when you get to DJ, like this is your opportunity to then go out, converse with people, obviously like in the club or whatever, have actual conversations, but like musically converse and bring stuff to the table and just feel that connection. Because music has always been social, right? It was never really meant to be this isolating, like solo pursuit. So for that, I love that. It's been a long day. But for as far as how that influences Portal, I like the main like first release that we put out in the main series that I initially want to build this project around is these collective mixtapes where for 1 week online we have producers from all over the world who are participating in these producer challenges that I'm hosting on Twitch. So we all get together and just make a bunch of music, separately on our own, but we're sharing it on Discord for a week. We have different daily challenges. And then at the end of the week, we all choose our best work. Or in the future, it's going to also be community vote driven as far as like which tracks make it on the final mixtape. But we put this whole week long like musical conversation together basically, and then publish it as a mixtape. And I just have so much fun again with that type of conversation that's really meaningful to me. I know for me personally, I love talking and I love speaking, but I feel like I don't always communicate my ideas best verbally, which is funny because we're on a podcast right now. But I really feel like I communicate best through music. And so that's why like I have so much joy bringing together these like week-long challenges and putting out these mixtapes. So it's yeah, it's our first one came out a few weeks ago. We have the next one scheduled, I believe, for January. Gonna make it a quarterly thing to start, and then hopefully pick up the pace if we get some more momentum. But want to keep this manageable. But it's been just such a great experience so far. I've met so many new people through it already.
I think manageable is a really good word to use there, because it's such an amazing intention, right? And this idea of being able to allow people to come together and make these mixtapes, it has so much merit to it. But I think as someone who's kind of orchestrating these things, it also requires a level of balance to be able to field all of the submissions, choose which ones are going to be in the mix, choose which ones are going to work well together in the form of like an hour-long set, etc. So yeah, I've always found DJing as being the best way to just like stay up with what's relevant within music more broadly. I think that there's kind of like, I love that you call it a conversation, because you can really stay attuned to like where things are at just by simply practicing, putting new music in your sets and whatnot. And now it feels like you're taking that a step further by saying, not only am I going to be, playing these shows, playing these festivals, et cetera, but now I'm going to be bringing in music from my community that might not be heard or appreciated elsewhere, and kind of give that a spotlight. So I think it's a really amazing intention to lead with.
Oh, thank you. It's definitely a big undertaking, but what else would I be doing? I don't know.
Yeah. And talk to me about sort of the inception of this and maybe the origins, because as you mentioned, it is a big undertaking. It's something that has kind of been the evolution of things you've worked on in the past. Like, kind of help me understand your process and what made you want to put this out into the world, and then how you actually were able to launch this in the first place.
Yeah. So I know I mentioned Team Supreme before. It was like this collective of 19 producers. And I really attribute so much of the success, or I'll say like progress of where I am now, to this collective. And so a lot of the inspiration and motivation for Portal is really kind of picking up somewhat where Team Supreme left off, and somewhat where Unspeakable left off, where I just, I know that selfishly I need like a community around me of other creatives who are pushing one another and challenging one another, in order to even have the motivation to just make music and stay active. Because if it's just me out here, it's fair. I don't have that same level of discipline and drive that I do when there's other people involved. So a lot of it came from just wanting, that sense of community again. But really, to me, what was special about Team Supreme was the individuality that everyone had within this community. It wasn't based on a specific genre. It wasn't all hip hop producers, R&B, dance, house. Everyone had their own very, very unique sound, and was so supportive of one another. And like, it almost felt like the goal was to push each other in the direction of like furthering their unique sound versus pushing each other to all sound the same. And that's something that I find to be pretty rare with a lot of groups, and especially with like a lot of traditional labels too. A lot of successful labels are definitely built around like a certain genre or a certain sound, and I think that's a great strategy for branding, for marketing. Of course, that makes tons of sense from a business perspective. But what I loved most about participating in Team Supreme was this sense of individuality, and that finding your own niche sound was the goal, and that was like valued. And you got like more praise for it, like the more, further in your own direction you would go versus sounding like someone else. So that's a huge motivation behind this as well. Just because, I mean, we've mentioned a bit about social media, as great of a tool as it can be, depending on how you use it. It can sometimes incentivize artists to, only want to make what is trending, because maybe that's going to be what gets them to the next level. And it feels like there's less incentive for people to really, truly like want to lean into finding their own voice, or, you know, do the scary thing. I mean, we were talking a little bit about fear and rejection earlier, you know, like being brave enough to post something that's different than other people, different than anything anyone else has like really heard before. So again, this is like very much the ethos of Portal. Like I don't have the answer to how this is going to work as a business model, but just creatively, my intention with this is to create a community, create a producer collective, and support a group of artists who are focused on finding their own unique sound and really want to incentivize that type of individuality and like bringing that to the table versus sameness. Really don't know how clear that was, but yeah, that's just what inspires me creatively. So yeah.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I think the individuality thing is really important to touch on because, as you just mentioned, I think a lot of artists today see the sounds that are working, they see the videos that are going viral, they see, you know, just the way to get your music plays. And I think a lot of the time that actually steers you away from finding your own individual voice, more towards like the collective sum of what's going to get me bookings, what's going to get me plays, what's going to get my music in these sets, etc. So I do think it's extremely important that we have those pockets for people to build upon their individuality, because I think that it starts to flip at a certain point in time, right? Like you do always have this kind of like consistent, this is the type of sound that will fit in any club across any country at any point in time. And that's always going to be a lane for people. But then you have these artists like, you know, Grizz or like Pretty Lights or something like that have this very unconventional sound where it wouldn't necessarily work, you know, in Vegas on a Saturday night, but they have these diehard fans that were really born out of their own individuality. And so being able to create a space for those artists to explore that and be encouraged to make something that sounds different, I think is very important to allowing those sort of unconventional artists and those unconventional sounds to really emerge.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. Yeah, no further comment. You nailed it.
Nice. And I wanted to ask, what is the genetic makeup of this first mixtape that you guys dropped? Because I'm kind of curious to hear the balance between producers that you met from putting music out on chain versus producers that you've had from teaching or being in your ecosystem more broadly. Like, what did that kind of look like?
Yeah, we had such a cool mix of people. Some folks I had just met for the very first time, connected online with for the very first time through this mixtape. So, for example, Broy Beats, I'm like a new huge fan of. I just met him through this Pledge Week challenge. And I was just like, oh my gosh, how have I never heard your music before? Like, I love these sounds. I'm so inspired by what you're doing. Like, you've got an awesome following yourself so far. So there's like a great mix of new people like that. There's other people that I've met through like Web3, like Vivid Fever Dreams, who I'm also a big fan of. But then there's artists that I've known for like 15 years, like my best friend, Goodnight Cody, who is also a member of Team Supreme. He's on the tape. So it's just, I kind of like wanted to, for this very first one, just put this out there and see like who's going to show up day one. Like, let's just see who's interested without me, pouring a ton into marketing. And like, I did send out a lot of personal messages to people, but I was like, let's just see who's like drawn to this initial concept and kind of start building from here without trying to create this huge glossy thing. And then have the momentum die down like after the first mixtape or two mixtapes. Like, I really just, my mentality going into this was like starting from the very bottom. I'm just going to post some stuff on the internet. I'm going to see who shows up. And yeah, the internet never fails. There's some incredible talents that participated. So it was a really fun, I guess, experiment to just see, who's going to be interested. I love it.
And I think it's the best mentality to have too, because you remove a lot of the pressure from yourself on expectation, on performance exactly. And what metrics you need to hit for this to be successful. It's like success is just putting it out into the world. It's not it having any certain amount of performance for it to feel like it was worth your time. And so I just want to applaud you for even taking that first step, because as we alluded to earlier, it's still no easy task to get all these people to submit music, to orchestrate it into a mixtape and then to release that, let alone what I imagine was maybe one of the most difficult parts, which was putting this music on sound, putting it on chain, trying to explain to people what it meant to, have a wallet, to be able to earn splits. Can you talk a little bit to me about that part of the conversation and how you navigated it?
Yeah. So at this point, because it's so small, I basically just told everyone. I mean, I have like a set of articles that I send to artists sometimes. That's like kind of my Web3 primer. I'm like, just read these and then come back to me with all your questions and we'll chat. Um, but yeah, because about, I'd say like maybe a third to half the artists were already on chain, had maybe put out some music NFTs. I know like Sound of Fractures is already very active in the space. But this was also an onboarding moment for a lot of the artists on the tape. Some of my friends actually here who are local to Idaho are on the tape, and like this was their first time getting anything on chain, setting up the wallet, the whole 9 yards. So I just try to have a very personal connection about, so I should say personal approach about it. Because I still don't think we have like a very easy way of explaining stuff to people unless they're already kind of active in the community and on Twitter and like know some of the terminology. It's still very, very daunting. So the best I can do at this moment is like send people this like little list of 3 or 4 articles that I have. And then I'm like, talk to me and we'll have a conversation
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
The word daunting really stands out to me there because I think, to your point, sending them some resources and then having a personal touch to getting them into the mix is 100% the right way to go about it. I've been
Yeah.
feeling definitely very, I just want to come back to the word daunting, where it's like these
Yeah.
artists have great music and I want to put it in front of people who would be willing to collect it. Because as you alluded to at the top of this episode, collectors are down to be involved in an artist's career. They're willing to support them financially in ways that we haven't seen before. They can be very positive to an artist ecosystem, but the ability to get a song on chain and to explain to them what's going on is very difficult. And now that we've kind of seen this liquidity dry up, where before you could just put a track on chain and sell it for 1 ETH and you would probably sell it within a week just because you happen to be early to that. That doesn't
Yeah.
really exist anymore. And so an artist
Yeah.
that's not very active in the space, they'll go through all this effort to make a wallet, to read these resources, to understand everything that's going on. They'll put their song on chain and then they'll get 1, 2, 3 mints. They'll make $5, $10, and then they'll be like, okay, well, I just spent 3 hours of my time, on the
Right.
lighter side, understanding all this just to not see any form of validation. And so I don't know, it's kind of more of an open-ended question, but what do you think we as a collective and a community need to do to make that more approachable for people?
Yeah, I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, part of my intention with Portal, amongst everything else I've talked about, was to actually make this a easier sort of onboarding opportunity for artists. Maybe if your first NFT is on this mixtape with all these other people, it's a little bit less intimidating. And it's like, okay, cool. I'll just get a wallet set up and we'll get this out and I'll kind of figure it out as I go, sort of a thing. I don't have a great answer for that though. I'm just, the analogy that I make with a lot of people who are like, why would I ever, want to interact with the blockchain when I don't understand it? This doesn't make any sense to me. I always say like, well, explain to me how your cell phone works, or like, explain to me how electricity works. And it's rare that like you'll find an average person on the street who can clearly explain how that technology works, but it's something that they interact with and that they use every single day. I mean, look at the pushback that like personal computers had, like when they were first entering the market, even like using the internet, et cetera. I mean, I think all of these ways of technology have had these initial barriers of understanding. So I don't know what the answer is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
honestly.
I
But I
definitely
think, yeah, go ahead.
I definitely don't know either, but I think you touched on something important there, which is that right now I feel like we lead with a lot of the tech benefits and like how it works and why
Yeah,
it's important and why it's relevant and why having a wallet matters and just all these things that at the end of the day, I think it's really just about dumbing it down and just making it culturally relevant and culturally exciting for people to want to have
yeah,
their music on these new platforms because they don't need to know how a wallet works. They shouldn't even need to know, in my opinion, like what it means to set up a private key, what it means to be changing
right.
networks. You have mainnet, you have optimism now, base, et cetera. And it's just so much and it's so overwhelming that I think
It's
for
very tech focused
99%
too.
of
Yeah,
people in music, they would just want to sign in with an email, and upload a song like they always have. And if it just happens to be there under the hood, I think that that's good enough. But I also don't think it's about like removing and abstracting it away to the point where like you don't highlight the cultural significance of what it means to be releasing music on this medium. I think what I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out is like, what is the middle ground where an artist can upload their song with an email without having to pay gas, without having to download MetaMask, but that they don't completely unawarely know that they're putting their music on chain? Because I do believe that there is something culturally significant about this chapter and being able to incite like kind of a new expression
Definitely.
and a new, wave of artists as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. It's a tough kind of line to try and walk. But yeah, I mean, the answer obviously just lies in making this, like, showing people how this is relevant to them in their lives. Um, right now, it's like a little bit difficult to explain that, maybe because it's just so new, and there's honestly, it's not going to be widely relevant for a little while, and that's just the way it is. And it's just going to take some special moment, some new idea, new platform, new invention that's like really going to click things over. I mean, even with like, laptops, again, Apple sales exploded when like so many of their marketing campaigns just all revolved around the person, the consumer, their life. It's like, oh, look, you can see like these family photos all like on your computer. And especially with music and the iPod too, like it's just all centered around the person and not listing
Mm.
off like the technology and all of the
Yep.
benefits and all these things that like people aren't going to take the time to read or want to even understand all of that. They just want to know, how is it relevant to them. So,
Mm.
for music, how is Web3 relevant to me as a fan? Like, how is that going to change my relationship with artists? Like, I think that relationship is huge, and it's going to take more labels, collectives, artists themselves demonstrating like how fans can be more involved in their careers or their creations, even if they want to be. um Otherwise, yeah, it's I think it'll be a slow process kind of
Yeah.
without that. So that's, yeah, why like these relate, like highlighting fan artist relationships through this collective is a goal of mine, but I don't have all the clear answers for that at the moment. Working
Totally.
on it.
I definitely don't either. And I think the word simplicity keeps coming to mind here because
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, we just make all this stuff way too complicated. And another thing that I've
Yeah.
noticed lately is that a big reason why SoundCloud became so popular and why even like Team Supreme was so popular is that there was such a willingness to experiment with new music, samples, unofficial remixes, etc. And I've been noticing lately that when you add the sale of something, so let's say you're selling an open
Yeah.
edition or limited editions of a song, you now are making money off of it. And that means that people have a lot more hesitation to be expressive with the type of music that they're making. Because if you're making money off of an unofficial remix, the industry is like largely stated that is
Industry
not
says
okay.
no.
That's not cool to
Yeah.
do. This person needs to get paid, etc. And so what happens is that there's just like a wall that's set right now where we just don't have like any unofficial remixes happening on chain because there's such like a negative posterity around that. And I think what I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out now is like, how do we just break down that barrier of saying that you can't even sell anything unless you have permission from this artist, to instead there being a way for the artist whose work you are touching to be able to come and capture that value at a later date, where it's not like you need to have X, Y, and Z's artist that you remix is, ETH address, which they don't have obviously, or their contact
Right.
information, or like a way of getting in touch with them. Because I feel like a lot of what made SoundCloud so popular was just artists being inspired by other artists, making a new form factor in the form of a remix, and then that remix propelling them to a new audience. And I think that a lot of what is required for new markets to emerge around music is a new form factor in general. And so one thing that I'm excited to
Mm.
see play out more is obviously things like Portal and these mixtapes. You're putting a lot of new music together in new and creative ways, but then also encouraging people to be more experimental on chain, where you can say, hey, maybe it's okay to put out an unofficial remix on something like Zora or something like Sound or whatnot, if you have the means of getting them that capital that you made later, versus not doing it at all, which I feel like in a lot of ways is very narrow and restrictive, where the only content coming out on chain right now
Yeah.
is original music from people who know about the space, which is like the tiniest speck of the population of music relative to what I think we need is much more of like a creative explosion of music to happen in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to see like we were talking about earlier, just more DJ culture, more conversation entering like the space, because that's what drives music. Music is derivative. Like it's always like repeating itself, commenting on itself. It's another language. Like you don't sit down to write a novel and for the sake of originality, come up with all sorts of new words and sentence structures and this whole brand new thing and then deliver it to someone and then they don't get any message out of it because it's like a different language. Like there's nothing being referenced there that they understand. So you're always referencing, what's come before. And it's unfortunate that the way the industry is structured now just it is almost at exact odds with the very nature of music and that conversation. So I'm keen to see that change hopefully soon. Yeah. Because I mean, with smart contracts and everything too, it just makes all that paperwork so much easier potentially to do instantly.
Yeah. I mean, it really is so powerful when you see it happen. I think what I'm optimistic about is that most people can come on chain from having earned first versus having to like put money into the system. So like historically, when I was buying my first ETH, I would download a Coinbase account. I would go and buy like X amount of dollars of ETH. I'd think about this as an investment. I would then maybe take that off Coinbase, go take that to MetaMask. Then I would be buying tokens or NFTs or all these other things. And I started with it as a very like investment centric behavior. And I think in a lot of ways that clouds the relationship you have with it, because if there's a world where an artist can come on chain, come to Sound and see that they have $100 waiting for them in a wallet that they can connect to their email or their Spotify or whatever it might be, I feel like that's a much different psychological way to enter the space, because now you have just like poker chips that you can play around with that you didn't even know you had in the first place. And so I'm optimistic that we can remove this come in through Coinbase, think about how much financial capital you want to invest, what the price of ETH is today, what you're going to do with this asset in 1 year, to instead just being like, someone who is on your mixtape, like they can just come into the space having never had any relationship with it, just have $10, $20 to play around with. And now they don't feel the pressure of like, I need to give my social security number to Coinbase to get started, because I just have a wallet with some ETH in it, which just makes it fun to play around with.
Right. And they come into the space with immediately a sense of their work being valued. It's not just sitting there on, I don't know, Spotify, YouTube, whatever, any other platform. And it's like, oh, this was directly valued because like someone wanted to collect a piece of this. Like, wow, interesting. Like, I don't know, as an artist like that who works primarily in digital mediums, like that's massive. So I think that would be a huge incentive to get more artists on chain for sure.
And one thing I've been thinking a lot about is that the past year and a half, I've been very forward about making the fact that it's on chain the headline. And it's something that I'm really working to develop, is recognizing that this music and these artists, they just need to be growing an audience across the board. Like they can't just make it on the back of being an on-chain artist. And maybe a very small segment of them can after a long enough time horizon passes and these artists are like getting the benefits of that. But for right now, I've just really been challenging myself to say, like, how do we just make all of this music and all of these artists that are playing around with these tools just culturally relevant on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, playing these shows, doing things in the real world, where then once fans start to like their music, there's this new pocket that exists out there that they can be a part of, but they don't have to come in through that new pocket. Because I think if you try and limit the vector in which someone can discover your music and say like, you can only collect my music, it's not going to be available anywhere else. Like you're not going to learn anything about me as an artist unless you're familiar with the nomenclature. I was really banging this drum for a while of like, okay, if you're a new artist on a new platform, you have so much benefit and you have all this advantage and whatnot. But I think the difference that I'm realizing now is all of that still holds true, but it's not going to work unless you have momentum, generally speaking. And so being able to have a growing fan base, being able to be playing these festivals like you're doing, playing these shows, and then for those fans that do trickle into your ecosystem, say, oh yeah, by the way, I have this new space over here that you can come play around with that has new people, new collectors, new ways to engage with me and an artist. It's like a benefit that exists under the hood, but it's not the selling point. And I think the more that people kind of discover it through their pure fandom and intention of wanting to get closer to you, it'll make their relationship with it a lot stronger than what I've currently experienced, which is people saying, I don't understand why I'd collect music. I hate NFTs. I don't want to collect them. I don't think that this is valuable. I don't want to buy it. versus like, yeah, this just happens to exist here. And I'm not trying to make you like need to go buy $1,000 of ETH to be a fan of me as an artist. Like just come to my shows and just like me as an artist. And
Yeah.
then if you want to express your super fandom or get deeper into my community as a whole, that's where this new pocket starts to really take place and take shape.
Yeah. Or it's like, hey, come to my shows and then I'll actually reward you in this like new way that I wasn't able to before. And so I think like fans coming in, like we were talking about earlier, like artists coming in and already just immediately having rewards. It's like fans coming in and not under the expectation that they immediately have to spend money on chain in order to be a part of your world, but it's like coming in with rewards already being given, for their participation, for showing up, or for even like, resharing music or all sorts of other ways. So I think that's going to be huge. And it's like, we just have to be patient and know that there's this whole new tool set out there and it's so exciting. And I think it's definitely in many, many artists' best interest to like start working with these tools now. So that way by the next like 3-5 years, when things are really built up in momentum and just overall like users and collectors, like you'll be ready. You'll have like these tools already ready to go. You'll have this infrastructure versus like waiting until it's super popular and then trying to get in and trying to figure it out. I think, if we can just get started early and not only for the artist's sake, but for the sake of like having an impact on how we use the technology and like shaping it. That's again why I want to get so involved right now too. It's like, it's a very creative thing and it's small enough right now where you as an artist individually can potentially have an impact on how this all unfolds, how this develops. You can have an impact on like this next chapter of the music industry if you want to get involved. You don't have to, but you can also just only focus on music and creativity and, hopefully have some great people around you to take care of the rest. That's great. I respect that mindset 1,000%. But I just know for me personally, I'm really excited about, having some impact on the future of the industry. And, as someone that like definitely early on in my career dealt with a lot of, questionable characters and maybe not the best treatment in certain environments and studio settings and clubs. Like this is really important for me personally to have some impact on the culture and on how we value music, how we value each other, how we do business. So yeah, I don't know. I'm excited.
It's
I'm
really well
hopeful.
said. And I feel like that intention definitely comes through, from like the consistency you've had and sort of the communities and the experiments that you've been developing, like all of that definitely resonates with me. And it's been a big reason why I've been happy and excited to collect your music, because I know that there is something more here than just like trying it to try it. Like it does feel like there's a collective intention here of wanting to make a difference. And I feel like it's a good segue into just like kind of closing this episode on the note of like, I love the direction that sound's been going in recently with all this social feed stuff. And even on Sound Today, you can come on and just share a song. And if someone collects it through you sharing it, like you can make $1. You know what I mean? And I think there's kind of this new emerging behavior that's happening where you don't need to have a lot of capital to get started. I think that's a very big selling point that's different from a year ago, where previously you needed to have $1,000 of ETH even to buy something in the first place. Now it's like you can come and collect something for free. If you really like a song, you can buy it for like $3. If you really love that song, you can share it. Someone else can buy it from you. And I just think this like new social behavior that's emerging around collecting without there needing to be like a very high capital barrier to it feels very progressive. And I'm curious to hear on your end, like what is kind of on your horizon and what's kind of some things that you're looking forward to in the months to come here.
Yeah. I'm just eager to see this kind of take shape in a way that what am I trying to say? I really want fans to have like this feeling or this experience that like I know I do when I'm digging for music, be it in a record store, buying music on like any music that I play in my sets, I always buy off of Beatport or Bandcamp or iTunes, wherever. And so also collecting it. And so I have this like really fun experience of like building my collection in some way that is like a form of self-expression. Your music collection and like the things that you choose to spend money on and value Like that is in a way like a very creative act. So I'm just eager to like see kind of more of the spirit of like DJ culture and digging for music spread to sound and Web3 in general in a way where I just have so many cool ideas for like, what if you could collect a song and then because you collected it, you have the right to like put it in mixes and stuff or like remix it and resample it and then put that back on chain and have the original creator get compensated for that. I mean, because we have the technology to facilitate that flow of value while keeping that kind of open conversation going musically, like that's what I'm really excited to see. I don't know if that's going to happen in the next few months, maybe. Maybe we'll start to see more of that, but that's that kind of, not to keep harping on the word conversation, but that kind of like ease of communication and translation of value from like, origin or sample to remix, reiteration, and like seeing value go back to the original is really exciting. And I think it's just gonna hopefully in some ways help not only independent artists, but just help like the evolution of music as a whole, and support this sort of like moment in time that we're at and like lead us to some interesting other creative avenues and not just a lot of music that sounds the same on TikTok.
Yep. I feel like it's a really good full circle way to close this conversation because you mentioned at the top of the episode you've been producing for 10 years. And I feel like in a lot of ways, all of what we're just talking about is very much in like year one. I think it's really going to take 5-10 years for these cultures to emerge. But I'm really grateful to be having these conversations now because I feel like we're going to look back on it in a couple of years' time and people are going to be like, oh, you were so ahead of the game, but it's fucking hard right now. And it doesn't feel like you're ahead of the game because it's difficult and people don't want to use it. They don't want to hear about it, et cetera. So even just having a pocket to have these conversations happen and to use this as a way to encourage people who are listening to get involved, I feel very grateful for it. Like I said before, I think that you're an incredible artist and have so much potential ahead of you that being able to just have this moment to say like, congratulations on launching Portal. I know you also just got new management, which we didn't get to cover in this episode, but that was an amazing milestone for you. There's going to be plenty more to come over the years. So thank you so much for coming on the episode. And as kind of a closing question here, where can people stay up with your work outside of this conversation?
Good question. I post a lot on social media. So you can find me at .music, DOTMVSIC. Spelling is stylized. So that's my Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, etc. That's really probably the best way to find me. From there, I've got links posted in my bios. I've got a number you can text if you want to stay updated on release announcements, Portal releases, all that good stuff. But yeah, thank you, Cooper, so much. This was such a great conversation. And I just appreciate everything that you're doing in the space and appreciate your time.
Well, I'm excited to see what happens. I know that Portal mixtape number 1 is now live, so go ahead and check that out. And I'm looking forward to episode number 2 in January.
Heck yeah, I'm stoked.
Awesome.
All right,
thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
We'll see y'all next week. Bye.
Bye.